Story 1. Got left behind in Nassau. Once thought I had time to grab food and shop a little but ended up losing track. Heard the ship horn while waiting for my conch fritters and sprinted back. But they had already pulled the ramp. Had to go to the port office. They gave me a paper with the next port information and told me I would have to fly there myself. A $450 flight later, I caught up in Jamaica. A day and a half of stress just for some hot sauce and a knockoff watch. Never again. Now I am back on the boat an hour early every time. Story 2. I own a tour company and provide tours to cruise ship passengers. I guarantee they will return to their ship on time. I ensure they are back an hour before they need to be. When asked what I would do if I failed my guarantee, I tell them I will buy a plane ticket to the next town. This helps ease their concerns. However, if you miss a ship, the best you can do is try to catch up to it. Story 3. We missed the departure because our flight to Florida was canceled. The airline put us on a plane to the Bahamas, and we caught the ship there. We missed only the first night and day. Story 4. My dad had a bad accident in one of the British Virgin Islands and completely destroyed both knees. My mom had to return to the cruise ship, where the staff escorted her back to their cabin, packed all their belongings into large garbage bags, and then put her back on the pier. The cruise ship left, and my poor parents were stuck in a tiny hospital with almost no medical services or staff over Christmas for a week before being medically evacuated to Florida. They were stuck there another week, during which my dad had emergency surgery, before finally being medically evacuated home. Luckily, they had travel insurance that covered everything. Otherwise, they would have had to take out a mortgage on their home at best, or face medical bankruptcy at worst. Story 5. If you stick with the cruise line arranged shore excursions, they will hold the ship for you. If you choose to venture out on your own and get delayed, you will have to find your own way to the next port to meet up with the ship again. Story 6. On a cruise from Australia to New Zealand, my then wife and I were at Weta Workshop with our kids. To save money, we organized the day trip ourselves rather than going on the one organized by the cruise line. The cost of their trip was 5 times what we paid for the same experience. After the excellent tour of Weta, my ex-wife spent a long time in the gift shop and finally bought what would turn out to be the most expensive Lord of the Rings fridge magnet in history. We missed all the taxis outside, so we asked the gift shop to call one for us. We did not have mobile phones as we did not think we would need them. Again, this was to save money. After waiting a long time for a taxi, the driver told us there was gridlock in Wellington due to the cricket match ending and a major accident. We arrived back in Wellington 30 minutes after the ship was supposed to leave. As we had been told repeatedly that the ship would not wait for anyone, we decided to stay at a hotel and arrange a rental car to get to the next port, Napier. It turned out the ship waited over an hour for us. We emailed the cruise line to inform them we would be rejoining the ship in Napier. We tried to fly, but it was too expensive. We tried to catch a train, but none were running. We tried to catch a bus, but all were fully booked. We rented a car, which was difficult since very few were available. The drive was enjoyable, allowing us to see a lot of New Zealand we would not have otherwise seen. Took us 6 hours to drive. The cost of the hotel and car rental was just over $1,500. My ex-wife still has the fridge magnet, the most expensive fridge magnet in the world. We did not get divorced for another 3 years, so I do not think the fridge magnet had anything to do with that. Story 7. Worked on a cruise ship, and you have no idea how common a problem this is. I would say 3/4 of the ports we visited, at least one passenger was left behind, so it was a well-rehearsed routine. The normal procedure is for passengers to be back on the ship 1 hour before departure. Once all those people are checked in through the security system, the passports for all the missing passengers, usually 20 or more, are gathered for landing ashore. The ship continues accepting people and filing their passports away until departure time. If the weather forecast is good, there is usually an extra hour built into the schedule, so at the captain's discretion, they can wait a bit longer. If more than 6 passengers are missing, or if it is more than one group, we usually wait. If only 1 to 3 were missing, we would sail. While the ship is departing, the passports for all missing passengers are handed to the local agent. This person waits on the dock, sometimes overnight, to give the passengers their passports and help them book alternate travel to the next port at their own expense. Sometimes this is a flight, but often it is a bus or train. When passengers arrive at the ship in the next port, they are welcomed aboard and allowed to continue their cruise. One time, 2 passengers did not show up at all. On the second day, the agent couriered their passports to the passengers' embassy and reported them missing. No one knew what happened to them. I would say cruises that operate within a single country likely have different procedures, but this is a very common issue, so they always have a plan in place. Story 8. I have never missed a cruise ship, but I had friends where the cruise ship left them behind. The cruise ship put them up in a hotel and then flew them to their next destination. They also bought them clothes and food until the cruise ship reached the next port. It was literally a whole process. They left the entire Gulf excursion behind. Story 9. A friend missed the ship in Juneau. They had to take a very expensive international flight to Vancouver to get their luggage. The port paperwork includes the name of the port agent. Call the port agent if you are running late, as sometimes the ship will wait for you. The hotel director and security will enter your cabin, open your safe, and retrieve your passport. They will give your passport and other paperwork to the port authority, who will hopefully assist you in reaching the next port. You are responsible for your expenses. Travel insurance will not cover costs if the delay is your fault. For what it is worth, we keep our passports and extra medications in a go bag inside the safe. Story 10. We mixed up the dates and showed up a day late. We could have easily caught up with the ship on a ferry to Catalina from Long Beach, but they would not let us and we missed the whole cruise. Story 11. Not a cruise ship, but a landing purpose destroyer. The 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit arrived in Civitavecchia, Italy, south of Rome. One of the Staff Sergeant Red Tag Marines stayed the night at a local woman's apartment and missed the ship. We saw him running down the seawall as the ship pulled away. A submarine from the task force turned around to pick him up, and then he was flown over to our destroyer. He was reduced in rank from corporal to private, placed on a bread and water diet, confined to the brig, and assigned extra police duties until we returned to the United States. Story 12. I was in Grand Bahamas once on a cruise with my family. We hired a local driver to take us around to see the sights. He swore up and down that he would guarantee us back in time to catch our ship. It was me, my wife, 2 small children, and my mom. Needless to say, we got stuck in awful traffic on the way back through town, and it was getting dicey. You could see the driver getting nervous, and my mom, riding shotgun, made a half-serious, half-joking comment that if we missed our ship, she hoped he had enough room for all of us tonight, and asked what was for dinner. The driver's face went super serious, and he took us on a slalom ride through traffic. You could see him plotting moves 3 or 4 cars ahead. Totally locked in, living out his racing dreams with me and my kids in the back seat. Fast forward, and true to his word, he got us there. We were probably one of the last to board. Took a few years off my life. Since then, I don't go far from port unless it's an official excursion where the ship will wait if you're late. Story 13. I was very annoyed on my last cruise. I paid for a balcony room and never saw anyone sprinting for the boat. Story 14. When they say the boat leaves at 3 p.m., you better believe it. Some people think the boat will wait an hour for them because they are important. No, it is gone. Story 15. We saw someone miss the ship in Alaska. Our next stop was Canada. The lady stomped her feet and screamed. The man just dropped all the bags she had bought and stared at her in disbelief. He was both hysterical and sad at the same time. Story 16. We passed out on the beach in Cozumel and got back to the dock to see our ship pulling away. We had nothing, just bathing suits and a little cash. We ended up in the immigration office being interrogated by some officers. My girlfriend at the time was arguing with them and generally being difficult. We broke up shortly after we returned. I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but they put us on another cruise ship heading to the same port as our original ship. The room was much nicer. We bought some clothes from the gift shop and made the best of it. I have seriously cut down on drinking since then. Story 17. I saw someone miss the ship with no noticeable consequences. It was at a tender port, meaning the ship was too large to dock, so tenders, basically lifeboats, were used to ferry passengers from the ship to the dock and back. The ship had just started moving out. One of the tenders was still available, so they sent it back to pick up the lone passenger who was almost left behind. Rumor had it that she was traveling with a child and no other adults, and had left the child at the kids' club while she went ashore. The captain decided to make an exception rather than be stuck with an unaccompanied child. I have no idea if that was true. If it was, I bet that cruise line is much stricter about allowing unaccompanied minors to stay on board. Story 18. Never fly on the same day as your departure. We always travel to the departure city 1 to 3 days early and make that part of the trip. There is no anxiety over missed connections, flat tires, delayed flights, or similar issues. It usually takes a couple of days to decompress and shift into vacation mode. When you board after spending a few days enjoying Miami or another location, you are already at the right pace. Story 19. In the late 1990s, I was on a cruise in the Caribbean with my extended family. We were at a beach on Antigua. While it was bright and sunny, the waves were picking up and growing fast. My aunts and uncles were body surfing in these strong waves, one of which nearly drowned me at 9 years old. All of them were injured by underwater rocks. They went to the hospital on the island. From what I heard, it was pretty chaotic there. They were frantic, trying to make it back to the ship on time, even calling to see if the ship would wait a little longer. The ship said no. I believe they had to catch a flight to the next stop and wait for the ship to arrive. We are all from coastal towns on large bodies of water, but still did not notice that storm rolling in without clouds. I had never experienced being tossed around like that before, like in a washing machine. Oh well, we all know now. Story 20. I was leaving either Greece or Turkey, but I cannot remember when the captain came on and said we are turning around to meet a boat bringing some passengers who missed the departure. I looked out my balcony and sure enough, a small boat was speeding toward the ship. Story 21. My sister and her husband booked a cruise and flew from the West Coast to Florida for an international trip. When they went to board the ship, they were asked for their passports. Both assumed the other had packed them. It turned out neither had their passports, so they were not allowed to board. They watched the ship sail away, had to book flights back home, and did not talk to each other for a few days afterward. Story 22. Back in the early 2000s, we missed our carnival ship in Grand Cayman. We had to go to immigration, but our passports were locked in our ship room safe. They called the ship faxed copies of our passports, and arranged a ride for us on a Princess cruise ship. We had an amazing time in a much nicer room on a much nicer cruise. We met our ship in Cozumel the next day. It did not cost us anything. I thought it was an adventurous trip. My husband was embarrassed and furious, but I had a great time. Needless to say, we are not married anymore. Story 23. Got left behind in Jamaica. When we got off the ship that morning, we decided to take a non-cruise tour to the waterfalls. We got in a van with several people, including a young Venezuelan couple. We were all from the cruise ship, and they assured us we'd be back in time. Had a great day at the waterfalls and stopped for jerk chicken and beers on the way back. Started getting a strange feeling that we were cutting it close on time. It was maybe an hour to an hour and a half out. We explained this to the driver, and he assured us we were fine because it would only take 45 minutes to get back. We expressed our concerns again, and it turned out the group was not all from the same cruise ship. That's when he also grew very concerned. He hurried us back to the van and off we went. He even asked us all to pay in the van so it would be faster when we got there. The Venezuelan couple didn't have money to cover their portion, and everyone else didn't have enough to cover theirs. So we were just outside the port gates, boat in sight, and all of these other tour guides had surrounded our whole party in a kind of threatening manner to get us to pay. My boyfriend asked where an ATM was and ran off kind of far to get more cash. I stayed behind as collateral. We finally paid the guys and ran to the boat. We got to the boat within minutes of it bringing in the ramp. People were cheering us on our run, and we could see the captains looking at us from the top. The boat was, let's say, jumpable if you were an idiot. They literally chucked our passports at us and off they went. Cruise services at port helped us get a stay for a couple of nights at an all-inclusive resort. We shopped the gift shop for clothes for our stay. We honestly had a great time, especially considering the last day of the cruise was an at-sea day. We landed in JFK in January in a maxi dress that resembled a Jamaican bobsled and sandals. Our luggage arrived a week later. Story 24. So, not me, but this happened last summer. We were flying from Las Vegas to Fort Lauderdale, with a layover in Chicago Midway. We were going home. Once in Midway, we saw our flight was delayed due to weather. It eventually got canceled altogether, and we were rebooked on a 5:45 a.m. flight into Tampa and then a connection to Fort Lauderdale. There was a family on our flight who got rebooked on the same flight. They were heading to Miami for a cruise. Had our original flight been able to fly, they would have been fine. But with the rebooking, we did not get to Fort Lauderdale until 2 p.m. the next day. Their cruise was leaving the port of Miami at 4 p.m. I think it was a Sunday, so it was possible they could have made it. But their bags got lost along the way, probably on the next inbound flight, so they had no clothes, nothing except what they took with them on the plane. I do not know what they ended up doing, but lesson learned. If you are flying to your port city, always leave at least a day early, maybe even 2 days. Story 25. The best part of a cruise is when they start requesting certain names to report in. It is time to head to the deck to watch the runners. Story 26. My daughter missed the cruise because she got off the boat to buy some lip gloss. She ended up staying with the nice family that owns the burger restaurant in town. Story 27. Went to Seattle to catch an Alaskan cruise. Visited the Pike Place Market, the Space Needle, and had dinner by the ocean looking at the cruise pier, with my mom saying we would be on one of those tomorrow. Woke up to an expletive from my mom, which I had never heard before. She had written the day down incorrectly. I think they ended up giving us 75% credit toward another cruise. We booked a condo in Whistler, rented a van, and drove up there. Turned out to be one of our best family vacations. We scratched the van, and my dad and I spent a day finding a Chrysler dealership that had the right code for touch-up paint. We applied Bondo and painted it well enough to pass the inspection at the rental place. Story 28. Here is a strange story. When I lived in Hawaii, I received a phone call from my daughter telling me that one of her friends who took a job on a cruise ship had been stranded on Maui. She had misplaced her security badges, so they had just asked her to leave at the next port. Poor thing. She was sitting on the dock with her suitcase when I found her. She was so relieved to see someone coming to help. They found her badges shortly after, but she had to wait until the ship was scheduled to return to Maui 2 weeks later. It was a harsh way to treat an employee. Story 29. Had an interesting experience on a Viking River cruise. One of the side trip buses got delayed, and the boat was required to leave its mooring. The bus took us to a shipyard about 10 miles downriver. We walked through the industrial area to a pier, and the boat arrived shortly after, allowing us to board. Story 30. One of the best missing the ship stories is from a Journey of Captain Obvious cruise when a man fell down a volcano. Fortunately, it was on the outside. Story 31. Had a stop in Casablanca. Decided to rent a car and see the Atlas Mountains. First off the ship to the rental place and we were driving. Made it to the mountains around 1 p.m. and headed back. Hit Casablanca traffic around 5 p.m. Ship departs at 6 p.m. At 5:40 p.m., we abandoned the rental car, took some pictures of the location, locked the keys inside the glove box, and ran away from the traffic area to find a taxi. We had been moving one intersection every 5 minutes for 20 minutes. Got away from the traffic, found a taxi, and got to the dock at 6:40 p.m. The dock in Casablanca was in the freight area. The dock manager drove us to the ship. Found out there were 3 excursion buses still stuck in traffic coming from Marrakesh, so they were waiting. The cost, we parked in an area where you can only park until 10 p.m., but we couldn't read the signs. The car got towed. The rental company found it a week later impounded. Total cost was around $450 for the ticket and loss of use. Awesome, wouldn't exactly recommend, but it was an exciting day. Also talked my way out of a speeding ticket. Story 32. Our extended family took a cruise to Alaska from Seattle. My cousin and her family missed the boat due to major airport problems. They were able to get on board at the first stop but had to disembark one stop early due to maritime laws. She was smart and had travel insurance, so she received some money back. Story 33. My colleague once took a 4-week vacation for a cruise. When he returned, I asked, "How was the cruise?" He responded that there was horrible traffic the morning they were supposed to leave, and they missed the boat. He ended up with a 4-week staycation. Brutal. Story 34. Not trying to be negative, but if you miss the departure line for a cruise ship, you have serious time management and maturity issues. Unless something unusual happened that prevented you from making it, you need to learn to be responsible if you are late for a cruise ship departure. Story 35. My tale of a lost soul on the 7 seas. I was but a wee lad following my cousins around the deck when we sighted a scene every 6-year-old boy gets excited for. The arcade. The hours melted as we ignored the tropical breeze and traded away our time battling in combat with most mortals. It was glorious. As must, our coinage ran out, but apparently my luck had not. My cousins were leaving ahead, and I absent-mindedly checked each coin slot for any forgotten treasure. There I found the token of my undoing. I called out, "I must have." But looking up from the machine after spending my last life, I learned I was now alone. Years I spent wandering those halls. Every door the same, every face unfamiliar, until eventually a kind soul took me to the captain who put my blubbering butt on the intercom to be claimed. The whole ship heard me wailing for my mom, who eventually came running. And thus ends my saga on the seas. Story 36. Not exactly what you were asking, left behind. But I was stranded on an island following a boat trip. There were 8 of us stranded on a distant isle after a storm, and because I was the mate on the ship that had set out only on a 3-hour tour, my portly, grumpy skipper often exploded into sudden but brief rages at my well-intentioned but ill-thought-out antics. Usually his outbursts and berating were followed by him removing his cap and beating me over the head. My existence was only made bearable by my secret love trysts with the girl next door fellow marooned passenger, and hope that a stranded professor could invent a device to facilitate our rescue. Story 37. Missed our ship out of Juneau due to an emergency room visit for a sprained ankle. Took a puddle jumper to meet the ship the next morning. The ship did call to ask about our passports, but the next point was Skagway, so we did not need them. Story 38. It's always good fun when you see someone running to a leaving cruise ship thinking they were left behind, only to turn around and see their actual boat. I saw that one in person. The display of emotions from the man was strong even from 10 decks up. The sudden sprint, the arms dropping in resignation as he watched what he thought was his boat leave, the realization that his boat was the other one in port, and the relief washing over him. A huge emotional roller coaster all wrapped into a minute or two. Story 39. The cruise was originally scheduled to depart from one port, but 2 weeks before sailing, it was changed to a port 2 hours away. My ex-husband, several others, and I did not board and missed a city. We made friends and flew to the next location, where we encountered more people who had experienced the same issue. Quite a few of us checked in at the second dock destination. Everything went well afterward, and we had a wild story to share. It was interesting discussing with other passengers who figured it out at the last minute and almost missed the boat. I felt glad we were not the only ones this happened to. Story 40. Not me, but 2 members of the house band while I was working on board. The biggest issue was that one of them was Ukrainian, so passports and visas became a problem. The company gave them some cash for a room for a few days and flights to meet up later, as we were on a reposition and not coming back. It was made even more difficult by the fact that they had no clothes except the beachwear they had on. They looked like drowned rats when they returned. The rest of the band was waiting at the gangway to meet them. Story 41. My grandfather stayed in the Dominican Republic for 3 months instead of cruising back to Miami and catching his scheduled flight back to the United Kingdom. I think it was the last stop and he did not fancy going home yet. Story 42. We ended up in a high-speed dash with a local taxi driver. In Costa Rica, we misremembered when the ship was leaving and for some reason couldn't check the app without the ship Wi-Fi. Fortunately, we made enough of an impression with the crew that they cared and noticed when we didn't show up. They called, And luckily we answered even though it was an unfamiliar number. We were already in a taxi with another local, but we were probably half an hour away, and the ship was supposed to leave in a few minutes. The ship employee spoke to the driver and said they would open the gates so he could drive right up to the ship. Then he sped close to 100 miles per hour to get us there. The other local passenger was both terrified and thrilled. We were still 10 to 15 minutes late, but half the guests were out on their balconies watching and clapped and cheered when we arrived. I don't even remember the driver's name, but he saved us. We would have been stranded without our passports or any supplies because the ship had taken them earlier for a particular border crossing. Story 43. I have never missed the ship because we always allow plenty of time to get back. However, on our last cruise, my sister-in-law became sick on embarkation day and could not board. She spent a few extra days in the hotel in Fort Lauderdale before she was well enough to fly home. She had to bear the cost of the cruise she missed. I am now certain that we will purchase travel insurance every time. Story 44. On all the cruises I have been on, I have never known or seen someone that happened to. However, I have seen passengers removed for infractions on board and left with their luggage to their own devices, including the ship's drunk who was finally removed for hitting on a nun. Story 45. I've wondered what would happen at one of the cruise line's private islands, formerly known as Coco Cay, if passengers were late returning to the ship. Story 46. Fog in New York caused me to miss my landing and a connecting flight to Miami. American Airlines was no help in getting me to Miami, so I booked JetBlue, then took a connecting flight to Nassau. I stayed overnight before boarding the cruise ship a day late. I had decided to leave my mobile phone at home, so I had to use my sister's flip phone, which barely had any minutes, to call my wife, who handled all the booking from home. Story 47. 30 years ago, the son of a friend of mine won 2 cruise tickets in a drawing at their church. It was a family of 4, so he bought 2 more tickets. They also took his wife's parents, so that was 2 additional tickets. The wife's parents did not have American passports. They all disembarked at one of the islands and went to the beach. They lost track of time and missed the ship. Not only did 6 people have to fly to Miami to make a connection to get back on the ship, but the father-in-law's passport had expired. I do not know how he was allowed on the ship in the first place. I also do not remember how he resolved the expired passport issue. Maybe things were different 30 years ago. It turned out that these 2 free tickets cost him a fortune when all was said and done. He told me it took him over 2 years to pay off the extra charges on his credit card. Story 48. On my first cruise, we returned an hour early, and some crew members were outside handing out margarita shots. The positive reinforcement was immediate. I have never been late. Story 49. Not me, but a coworker on a ship. His first port was in Colombia, and he missed the ship. The cruise line paid for him to stay overnight and get to the new port, which was in Panama, but they made him pay them back. He essentially worked for free for 2 months as they garnished his wages until the travel was paid for. Story 50. I have posted this before elsewhere, but this is a detailed and interesting story about what happened when one man missed the ship. Story 51. Not me, but when I was young, my mother was left behind after some issues with our plane flight caused her to be put on a separate flight, making her miss the departure day. She ended up flying to the next port where the ship was going and then boarding there. Story 52. We did not get left behind, but one couple did just barely miss boarding at one of the ports we stopped at. The Coast Guard brought them from the pier to the ship. It was pretty embarrassing for them since many people watched it happen. I am not sure how they got the Coast Guard to ferry them like that. Story 53. It was a very small cruise ship, just a few hours trip along the coast of Turkey. We arrived by taxi sent by the travel agency. The boat had already left the dock but returned especially for us. Story 54. I wish I had just packed and never returned to the ship. Instead, I stayed like a fool. Cruises are the worst way to travel. Never again. Story 55. They should leave a small rowboat behind for those who miss the cruise departure time. This way, they can continue their cruise independently. Story 56. You could not make me go on a cruise if you paid for the ticket and bought everything I needed. No way. A great sailing trip would be something else. 2 weeks out on the water with maybe another couple would be my cup of tea. Story 57. Not quite what you are asking, but I met someone whose mother missed their cruise. The grandmother did not mail the ticket in time. It arrived 3 days late. The cruise was called the Titanic. I stood there looking at a person who most likely would not have existed if their grandmother had gone to the post office on time. Story 58. Missed embarkation because Delta Airlines had the engine open on the tarmac for 5 hours until they finally removed the part from another plane. There was a 5.5 hour delay. Had to fly to the first port, missed 2 days, then had to get off early at the second to last port and find my way back to the airport, which was about a 5 hour drive. There is a law regarding international ships. I will never take a cruise again. Flying in early was not an option because I had to see patients. Story 59. On the island of Corfu, one day we were supposed to take a boat with a transparent bottom as a tour. I do not know how, but I think we went to the wrong meeting location where there was no one else except us. We ended up missing the event for that day, so we explored Corfu City on our own instead. This was back in 2008. Story 60. Well, I needed more lip gloss and the cruise ship did not have my brand. So I left to get it, and on my way back, I watched the cruise ship sail further and further away. I yelled in frustration and called my dad immediately, telling him to put on a deeper voice and tell the captain to turn the cruise ship around. He said he could not and that I needed to stay with someone while my mom and dad went on the cruise. That quirky girl, Tina, from school offered to let me stay at her family's apartment. I had a rotten time, but I met a big, friendly ocean animal. Tina's family asked me to help work at their burger restaurant, and I did not know what to do, so I cried. That's when the big, friendly ocean animal came in to check if I was okay and then gave me his number. That's my meet cute with a cute big, friendly ocean animal. Story 61. I argued at length that we did not have to return to the boat and could just live in Belize. I did no research, but they invited me to go on a vacation with them again. What is the word on not having the funds for the return flight? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.